here the implementation of implementing find all widgets and find widget by ID using the default using these functions that are the default functions implementation that our CRUD provides for us out of the box. Yes, right. But they add some unnecessary burden that we have to cast it. We need to do this optional. Right? And also these names are very generic, find all, find by ID. They're very generic. Ideally, the controller wouldn't have to know any of the idiosyncrasies of how to use a repository. Ideally, it would have high-level functions such as, instead of find all, something like find all widgets, right? Or instead of find by ID, it would be maybe find widget by ID. Something a little more readable, yes? And also that it would not it would not cause me to do this unwrapping, which is very weird, right? So let's deal with that. Let's fix that a little bit. So what we could do here, if we can go back to our repository and implement our own queries. We can implement our own queries, right? So for instance, we might want to do a public widget, find widget by ID, where I provide an integer ID. And I would like to also have public lists widget that has find widgets, find all widgets. Ideally, I would have these functions, right? Not necessarily all the low-level functions. Find all. I would like to have find all by all widgets, right? Also, instead of forcing me to unwrap or cast, right, I would like to have everything already in the correct data type. Okay, right? So we can ask JPA to implement these for us. We don't have to implement this from scratch, right? You just declare. You only declare the interface. Now you only declare the functions, right? And then you can say, okay, well, how do I implement? What SQL query would I use to implement this, right? And the way we do this, it says, I would say, use the following query. Use the following query. Select widget from widget where widget ID is equal to ID. Right? Notice that this almost looks like SQL. Almost looks like SQL. Right? It's actually a higher level version of SQL. It's an object-oriented version of SQL. Right? Notice that this widget here, it's not the table widget. Right? Obviously, the table is not even called widget. Right? It's the class widget, which maps to a table called widgets. Yes? Right? So again, there's a lot of magic happening here. But it looks very much like SQL. It's actually a language called JPQL. Right? It's a query language that is specific to using the JPA infrastructure. But it almost looks like SQL, so it's very easy to read. Select all the widget instances where the widget is of type widget, and the field ID is equal to this placeholder, which is called ID. Right? Maybe we can call it widget ID. So this placeholder needs to map to what? Needs to map to this parameter here. Yes? I'd like to be able to take that parameter and inject it in there. So to do that, we can refer to this placeholder and map it. We can say, create a parameter, right? So this ID, map it to this placeholder widget ID. Right, so this maps this ID to this placeholder over here. And we'd like to be able to do the same thing from find all widgets. We're going to say query. This will be select a widget from widget. So this is the equivalent of select star from widgets, right? But using this pseudo SQL version. Okay, there are no parameters. There's no parameters whatsoever. There's no where clause, meaning we want all of them. No, we want all of them. All right, so let's restart this. I'm sorry. Now that we've declared this, we can rewrite our controller to use these more targeted versions of our query. right? So instead of using this repository find all, we could do return repository dot find all widgets. That's much cleaner, right? Without having to cast, without having to unwrap things. Same thing for the widget ID. Instead of using this convoluted implementation of this optional, we can just say return. Oops. So this will be return. Excuse me. Return repository dot find widget by ID, and we pass in the ID without having to unwrap or checking, right? It'll do that for us underneath. Yes? Right, so let's restart the server and hope that this doesn't blow up. Okay, all right, this time I hope it didn't drop. Yeah, I don't see a drop here. Okay, good. So we still should have our database. Let's refresh. Let's see. Yep, our widgets are still there, and our query hopefully, yeah, still works, right? So it retrieves, so it works identical, right? So that we had earlier. So widgets, I get still all the widgets, but our implementation, our code is so much cleaner, right? And easier to use. Make sense? All right, excellent.